This is Open Source Tonight for Wednesday, March 18th, 2020, and I'm your host, Vincent Maggard, and today I'm joined by my guest co-host, Tom, from the Switch to Linux project.
Greetings. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm not doing too bad today. Just kind of getting here into the office and getting ready to go.
All right. Sounds great. Well, I'm glad to see you could join me today for the show. Very great to have you on the line. Folks just tuning in here to the podcast, of course, let me tell you right now, I do like Tom's stuff. Great fellow. Very, very sharp when it comes to Linux. So definitely check him out at switchtolinux.com, at switchtolinux on Twitter, and of course at switchtolinux on YouTube. I believe I said all your links correctly. Did I miss anything? At least for the Linux stuff. I know you've got the Writing Done Right as well. That's for the writers. Or people interested in writing, right?
Those brought to you to
Okay, okay, I'm getting something from you again. Okay, I don't know what happened there, but we were not having audio from you.
check.
All right.
Interesting.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. I could hear you through the whole thing. I just and I'm seeing the indications on the stream feed here, so that's good.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. So, yeah, I don't know what that was all about, but hopefully that won't happen again during the thing. Anyway, did I give all your links out correctly?
Yeah, so the Switch Linux links were correct. So if you are an author, though, you can head on over to the project at writingdoneright.net or YouTube at Writing Done Right. And I teach you how to do FOSS software authoring and full book production over there.
And that's all done on the wonderful open source operating system called Linux.
Correct. All of my books, I have 6 books published right now, all of them written, produced, and distributed through the Linux platform and various open source software.
Exactly. And you can't beat open source software, in my opinion.
Nope.
Anyway, so we're going to start our news this week off, everybody. Let's get right into the news. I was going to start off with Brian Lunduke's thing here, but I'm still trying to figure out where it went. So we're going to just hop over to OMG Ubuntu for now and start there. We'll come back to his news in a moment, which is related to OpenSUSE's board members and all kinds of resignations and stuff going on there. Pretty boring stuff. You can probably skip past that news if you don't care. This week in the news, though, we do have a couple new things. So, first of all, for the Windows users out there, which, I mean, hopefully you switch to Linux soon, WSL2 will now allow you to install the Linux kernel on Windows using a new Windows update that came out on Windows 10. So, if you want to run Linux inside your Windows system, it's now got the new version of WSL officially out with the new Linux kernel and everything packaged. Again, I don't know why you would do that, but maybe Tom can shed some light on this here. Tom, you understand why anybody would want to run Linux inside of Windows like this?
If you need to run certain Windows applications but still need to do Linux development, it's a good reason to do that. So there are valid reasons for it.
Yeah, I can see that. That being said, though, I think it's still better just to have a separate machine. The little bit I had played around with WSL, to be fair, it was the first version, not the second version, but it seemed very limiting. It was really more like having a bash shell that could, work in an Ubuntu or Fedora environment. I mean, sure, that could be useful, but it's not as powerful as a full desktop system.
Yeah, it depends on what you're doing. So, like, if you ever do Amazon stuff like AWS, EC2 clouds, server management, and things like that, then it does make a lot of sense to build out servers on the local system. So, I mean, there's valid reasons for it, for sure.
Yeah, I can see a use case for that, obviously, and working with a lot of different server stuff, being that Linux is the dominant server platform these days, I can definitely see it making sense. And that's always been the case I've seen from Microsoft's people about this is, well, the whole point is for developers, right? It's not for the normal users.
Yeah.
And that does make sense. So this week we have been running a little low on news, so there's not too much to talk about. Another thing that's happened this week, though, was Gary 3.36 was released. And I'm a Thunderbird user, so this doesn't really affect me. I don't really care for Gary. It's okay. I haven't really used it much. What's your thoughts on Gary? Do you use it?
I have not used it. I generally didn't like the format of it in the past. Just based on the screenshots I'm looking at right here, though, I might actually want to poke around and play with it a little bit just to have a look. I use Evolution for my primary business, and I use Thunderbird for the secondary stuff. Just the way I need to sort boxes and things. So those two together work for me. But this actually looks, just from the screenshots here, it actually looks like something that is impressive enough that I might actually want to poke around with it at least to play with it. So.
Yeah, it does look very nice. I will say it's definitely, I think the design, it looks like they've changed the design from what I remember. And I do like the way that it looks here. I don't know if maybe they haven't changed the design and it's just been so long that I'm late to the party. But regardless, it does say here in the article that they've redesigned the Mail Composer. So that makes me think that they've probably been doing a redesign.
It looks almost from these screenshots here, again, I haven't looked at it, but from the screenshots, it almost looks almost identical now to Mac Mail, which would probably please some people. I actually know one person that has been looking for an open source mail client that has this exact style and design, so I might pass this over to him to have a look at to see how he likes it. So based on just the screenshots, but I don't know, I'll poke around with it, I guess.
It does definitely look very Mac-like. I definitely will agree with you on that. That was the first thing I thought when I seen it was this looks like it's supposed to be on Mac OS.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely could see a lot of people that are used to Mac Mail, where I could definitely see them possibly liking this. It definitely reminds me a lot of Mac Mail. Someone that used to use Mac OS, I didn't really use Mac Mail, but I did open it a couple times, and this definitely does look like Mac Mail. But to be fair, last time I opened Mac Mail was a long time ago at all. So I'm comparing to a very old version here. But that being said, I think it's good for people to have choices. That's what open source is all about. And it does look like that Gary is definitely going to possibly give a good choice for somebody switching from Mac OS if they're used to Mac Mail. Mm-hmm. But I tell you what I would really be interested in, and maybe somebody's made this video already on YouTube, is to take somebody, their self or somebody else from Mac Mail and put them on Gary and see how quickly they get adjusted to it. I think that would be the real test. Because for me, I mean, I'm not used to Mac Mail. I never really used it in large scale. So for me, that wouldn't be a good test. But maybe for somebody that has used it for years, try moving them to Gary and see what their experience is. Do they struggle or do they catch on pretty quickly? I think that would be the real test. I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's most of our news for this week. That being said, the other thing that came up this week was the OpenSUSE developers, or well, not the developers, but the board, I should say. There's been some situations surrounding the board here, and Brian Lunduke, he was talking about this. Some of the board members have resigned recently here. And so that's a whole big thing here. And there was one person that resigned in protest and another one that resigned, or not resigned, but there was one that was fired, if my understanding is correct, and one that resigned in protest because that person was fired. And I do apologize because I'm still actually pulling this up here because I thought this was originally on Twitter, but apparently this was supposed to be on Reddit. And I am technically poaching this from the Switch to Linux server here because that's where I seen it. So go check out that Discord server. But anyway, Brian Lunduke, the open source community, he posted this. Or somebody else posted this. No, somebody else posted this as him. Or a screenshot of him, actually, I should say. From the looks of it here. I honestly don't use Reddit enough to know the difference, really. But it says here, Brian Lunduke, the open source community, or not the open source community, the OpenSUSE community, is currently in the process of imploding. The @OpenSUSE community, he writes on Twitter, is currently imploding. One board member was forced to resign with dubious reasoning. Another quit in protest, arguing name-calling and general bickering, among the community. Calls for a vote with no confidence of the remaining board. So it looks like I'm not really clear on what's going on with the OpenSUSE board, and I don't really feel like most of our audience cares if we go into this too much myself, but I could be wrong. But I don't know if you have any insights to add here, but it just seems to me like normal corporate politics to me.
Looking at this, I think this might cross the line into some political discussion, so I want to defer any discussion on it, honestly. Just looking at the brief comments and the feedback here that I'm seeing, so I'm not going to say anything else about that one way or the other.
I got you. Well, I definitely will say that, we do try on the show not to go over politics, so we'll probably just leave it there. I just wanted to point out to everybody, this is going on if you care. So that's probably where we'll leave it. But whenever you want, we can jump into our topic for today. And today's topic, which you are the expert on and I'm not, so I will defer to you on where we should go with this. But we're going to talk about writing on Linux. And I'm assuming we're going to talk about writing books, but could be any type of writing in theory.
Yeah, of course, writing, any type of writing is generally easy on any type of platform. But what I want to focus on is the power of Linux for actual book production. Because, writing, obviously writing something, you can pull up any operating system and open up Google Docs and write a document. So writing something isn't particularly impressive. But what is impressive is the ability to produce entire books. Now, I produce my books on print books, ebooks, and audiobooks. All of it is done on Linux. So, and there's even many tools I've never even used that seem like a very useful thing. But I think what I want to talk about is, starting with the progress. Where do you start with your writing? I'm not a cloud-based guy personally, so I like to do writing on documents and then just keep backups of things. I do send backups to my Nextcloud server. I can actually edit files on my Nextcloud server because I do have a LibreOffice Online component on that. But ultimately, I use LibreOffice. Why LibreOffice, not some of the other ones? Well, because it's the most robust. Not only do we have a word processor, but we have the full ability to do the full entire book production, embedding your fonts, full page style sheets, all these types of things. Stuff you might actually find in the competitors as well, but LibreOffice is such a large foundation, it's such a large organization, such a large platform that it's not going away, and there's so much support and support communities around it that you can pretty much solve any problem you're looking for just by doing some basic internet searches. So that's kind of where I start. Write things on LibreOffice, get all your drafting done, and then you proceed on into formatting books from there. So I guess we'll kind of start there as your first step. Get a good word processor. I use LibreOffice, LibreWriter, and start going from there. And of course, that's free and open source and also cross-platform. So if you are stuck on a Mac, you are stuck on a Windows machine, you can use LibreOffice if you don't have access to Word. So I guess that's the first point, if you want to stop and elaborate or ask anything on that.
Yeah, so one thing I would like to ask you here before we go on is actually if you could go over for your general process of how you would, actually do this. Let's say that I am a first-time author on Linux and I want to understand your process so I can make my process. Give us just, the quick, maybe, couple paragraph version of your process. Obviously, I'm sure you could go on and write a whole book about your process. Anything in life can always, be added into more complexity. Mm-hmm. But just to simplify it for our listeners at home or on the road, wherever they're listening, what would be your simplified process? I've got a book, I've got it written, and this is how I'm going to write it. This is how I'm going to publish it. This is how I'm going to do the audiobook, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay, so we're going to assume that the manuscript is done, right? That's basically what you're asking. Manuscript is done.
Yeah, and then you're just going to go through the formatting and EPUB release and everything like that.
Yeah, so there's three basic things. So let's look at the audiobook first, which is usually the last thing I do and produce, but we'll do that one first. So the reason I do that is it takes a long time to do the full production of an audiobook. It's actually a very painful process. I put it right up there around root canals and, some other bad surgery. That's how I feel about it personally. But it is something that I'm decent at, I'm good at, and I use Audacity. Though I like dropping and laying the tracks first. So I like to lay the tracks and then I go ahead with the rest of production, because reading a book slowly out loud for an audiobook gives you that last final pass edit before you're good. So, you'll catch those last final things that you might otherwise miss by reading and narrating your book. And then I have all these files on Audacity, and then I'm going to go into the process of Audacity. I'm going to edit out all of the breath markers. I'm going to normalize everything. There's two basic places where you put ebooks or audiobooks, for distribution. Now there's a few of them, but I use Findaway Voices and I use ACX. So ACX is an Amazon-owned company that puts your audiobooks on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. I always like using that because the Audible part, they give you an Audible link. If somebody buys your book using your Audible link and signs up for Audible, they give you a big credit for that. And it's a substantial amount of money that they hand you as an affiliate. And then Findaway Voices literally puts you almost everywhere else an audiobook can be sold, including on the ACX, but you miss out on that affiliate credit from Audible. They will negotiate a better deal with iTunes, and so literally they'll put the book audiobooks.com, Audible, like anywhere you can think of, wherever you buy your audiobooks. And there's about 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 different online marketplaces. So to get the formatting right, you have to have a certain processing code. Well, there's actually plugins built for Audacity. You just download the plugins, put them in, run it through the script, and it will output the audio in all the proper formats for you. So it's why doing it on Linux is so easy. Just record your audio, master your audio, like you're processing the audio, getting all the breath marks out, getting all the gaps out, making sure everything sounds good, and then run it through this processing plugin, and then it's set to go. So that's the process for that, fairly easy. So that's your audiobooks. And then you have the audio files, you just drop them up on ACX and you drop them up on Findaway. Now, before I put them on ACX, though, I usually have the paperbacks and the ebooks already on Amazon, because if your paperbacks and your ebooks are already on Amazon and you link that account to your ACX account, you can simply click the button and it pulls in all the metadata, so you don't have to do anything other than upload the audio files. All right. So second, let's move on to ebooks. So there is a open source application called Sigil, which you will find inside of your Linux repositories. Sigil is a full-scale professional ebook editor. So you take your manuscript from LibreOffice, export it as an EPUB file, import it into Sigil, and then you master it. We're going to clear out all of the junk formatting that any word processor adds to the text. You want to clear all that stuff out. You want to make your good chapter sections. You want to add in any custom fonts you want to do, all your style sheets, add your metadata, add your cover image, and boom, it outputs a book that's perfectly formatted, will pass all validation. They have internal ebook validations. So now you have an EPUB file. You can upload that to Amazon. You can upload that to any other distribution place, or just sell it directly on your website. So for print book and ebook distribution, I use Ingram Spark, which is the same printer that pretty much everybody uses, and I use KDP, which is Amazon's platform. And again, you do too, because Amazon gives you really high royalties for selling on their sites, not really high on other places. So you use Ingram to push to everywhere but Amazon, and you use Amazon to push to Amazon. So that's kind of the process. So the ebooks, Sigil, very easy to use. It's basically, though, you do have to know a little bit about HTML editing, because an ebook actually is an XHTML document zipped inside of a zip file with a different extension. That's literally all an ebook is. Zip files, go figure. And then print book, of course. Your print book, just get your manuscript and then start doing page styles, page template style changes, all inside of LibreOffice. I have a ton of videos about how to do page styles, paragraph styles, character styles on the Writing Done Right channel. So you can follow along on those. So that's kind of the process, how to get everything going and up and running.
Okay, that seems simple enough. And also, just so everyone knows, I am going to put in the show notes the things he was just mentioning here. I'll get the links from either him or Google, depending on wherever I can find them first after the show. We'll put them on the show notes. You can visit us online at opensourcetonight.com for show note information. But anyway, continuing on here with the questioning here, Tom. So that seems like a very simple process, and I can follow you even as someone that's never published a book. So my next question to you is, okay, so we've got the book. When it comes to dealing with Linux, is there any gotchas, right? Is there anything that you wish you had known when you started this? I feel like that's a good question to ask here.
That's a good question. When I wrote the first book, I was still a Windows user. So I wrote that. Actually, I wrote that on a Surface Pro 1. Most of it was written on my Surface Pro 1. Some of it on my work computer, but. So transferring from the Microsoft platform to the Linux platform, the only real gotchas you're going to have, I would think, would be the software versions. This is why on my Linux channel, I'm always talking about I don't want to push automatic updates on everything because they could move things around. For example, Audacity. Last time I was doing an ebook or an audiobook on Audacity, I accidentally upgraded my system. It was purely accidental. But since I'm using a rolling PPA for Audacity, it upgraded to the latest version. They moved all of the places to do your extensions and things like that. It used to be called chains on Audacity, allowed you to set up a processing file. So I had a giant processing chain. So after my editing, I had to push one button. It would go through and run all of the processing I would need to do to upload to all the ebook distributors. Well, they moved it and changed the name in one version. And so if you're following an old tutorial, you might be like, this doesn't work anymore. So just if you're listening to this, if you have an old version, it's under the File menu, Chains. If you have a new version, it's under the Tools menu, Macros. Same thing, they just completely changed it. And so that's one of the gotchas, is when the software versions change. We had a similar thing happen on LibreOffice. Several of the edits, in fact, the video I should be doing sometime today on Writing Done Right, where we're talking about how to get a bibliography on its own separate page with a section header so it can appear in your table of contents. The section editors changed. They used to be in the Tools menu. Now they're under the Styles menu, I think. They moved them. I forget where they put them. But they moved them all around. And so these are one of those gotchas that you get. But we do have those same gotchas with proprietary software as well. It's just I do notice that in the FOSS software, sometimes things move more frequently than they should. I think that's probably the only gotchas I can think of off the top.
Okay.
I wouldn't even know how to produce a book on Windows.
Well, neither would I. To be fair, I don't know on Linux that much either. Another question for you here. As far as going to that stability and everything, different Linux distributions will handle updating in different ways. What would you advise? I'm a first-time user of Linux, and I want to write a book on Linux. What is the distribution that you would advise me to go for, or distributions if you have a couple picks?
Sure. I like staying inside of the Debian family when I'm doing major production. And the reason is they're never going to change your versions. They're never going to move things around. So on my regular computers, I use Linux Mint Cinnamon because it's just absolutely the easiest formatting. On my lower end computers, so like I have one computer dedicated just to write books, that actually runs Peppermint. And because Peppermint, again, is just as intuitive, it's just as easy to use, but it's also, a fraction of the system resources. So I use Peppermint. I recommend anything inside of the Debian family or maybe the Ubuntu family. The downsides of Ubuntu right now is with everything integrating through snap packages is they're causing those software upgrades automatically, and so things might move around on you. I like to wait until I'm done with a project, and then I'm going to roll my updates so that I'm not trying to find out where things are in the middle of doing a project. So that's why I would probably steer clear from anything that's going to automatically update. So I love Arch. I use Arch right now. I'm recording this on Arch, but I don't use Arch in full on production because things change too much. I like the stability of the old Linux Mint, the old Debian, things that don't change regularly so that I can keep track of what's going on where. So that's my thought.
Okay. And I will just to your counterpoint here, or to your point here, going further to it, one thing I will definitely say as someone that does get work done on Linux, don't use a distribution that has auto updating and all this stuff. You really want to, just like Tom was saying, be able to have control. And I would agree with Tom, when you're doing production on Linux, probably better just stay in the Debian family. Now, the one thing I will say as far as the snaps go, some people will say you can disable the updating. And to be fair, on most systems, there is a system service that you can disable. But then you're not getting security updates or anything. And as soon as you manually run your updates, you're still going to get all those feature changes. So I'm with you. The snaps are not good for production. On Ubuntu, some apps only ship as snaps now. And so that's very problematic. So I don't know. Right now, I'm seriously considering moving away from Ubuntu because of that. But anyway, to your point, I would probably advise staying in the Ubuntu family, or not the Ubuntu, but the Debian family, or possibly something based on Ubuntu like Linux Mint. And by the way, on the Linux Mint thing, would you advise them to go with Linux Mint Debian edition or the regular edition based on Ubuntu if you had to choose?
No, I mean, the one based on Ubuntu is fine. Linux Mint is pretty much against a lot of the things that make Snap fairly bad, which is why they strip all the Snap out of it. They replace it with Flatpak. Now, if you do want those containerized things, because there is a valid argument for the containerized, I think the best of the containerized platforms are app images, because it's really the impetus is on you to update it and upgrade it. So you can keep an old app image around if it's a particular one that works best for you. Using the app images is actually a better option. Linux Mint, of course, does Flatpak support out of the box. And so Flatpaks are decent, but again, they will update to the latest feature versions if you're not careful. And so even that I'm not a big fan of. But the app images, they will stay put until you actually act on the changes. So that's why if you do want those containerized ones, the app images are going to be your best.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The app images are great. And the other thing I will say, too, for those that aren't aware of how app images work, they're just a file you download and you set as executable and you can run. And the great thing about those is, and I've dealt with app images before, one of the great things about app images to me is the fact that if something goes wrong, let's say you do download that latest version of XYZ application and it has issues, if it's an app image, just go back to the older version of the app image, launch that. Mm-hmm. You don't even have to re-download or anything. There's no rollback process. You just close the wrong version, the one that's got your issues, and you open the one that's not. Takes like 10 seconds. So I think for anybody that needs to get work done, app images are probably the way to go, like you said. Mm-hmm. Now, as far as packaging a book on Linux, you haven't ran into any issues with any of these companies. They don't really care what you're packaging on. As long as you're meeting the spec for the audiobook, the audio level requirements, all that stuff, the particular format of the EPUB book, etc., they're happy with you.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't even know. The formats that you need, of course, you need MP3 for audiobooks. The ebooks, depending on the company, an EPUB is always going to be accepted, and an EPUB is the open source format for a book anyway. There's other ones like Amazon will do your Mobi. There's two Amazon has. I forget what the other one is. But you literally create those by uploading an EPUB file and downloading the Mobi file. Of course, there is. We didn't mention Calibri is a excellent application which you can feed into it an EPUB and you can export any other ebook format that there is. I do a warning about that though. On some versions, and I haven't tested latest versions, but when you use Calibri to edit an ebook, it actually breaks the navigation menus in iBooks for some reason, and I don't know why. Now, that bug may have been fixed by now. I probably would like to test that again soon, but there was a time when Calibri would break the iBook navigation, although everywhere else it would perfectly validate and things like that. So there is that application. Most other platforms, some of them, like the more user-friendly ones like KDP, they can be like, hey, upload a docx file. I never upload a docx file because it's too unpredictable. Most of them will absolutely prefer you use a PDF. Well, everything can do a PDF. In fact, Linux does PDF better than Microsoft does. Usually need to install an external program to get PDFs working in Microsoft unless something has changed in the last 5 years. Linux out of the box support for PDF. I don't know. Does anybody out there can tell me can Microsoft Word now save to a PDF directly without a problem? I'm guessing it can, but I don't know.
Yeah, I have no idea either. As far as the PDF goes, when you save that out, do you do that from LibreOffice, or how do you produce the PDF for the organizations that want those?
If you go into LibreOffice and you go down to the file menu export, there's a PDF option. Now, before you do that, you want to go down to document properties and go over to the fonts page and make sure fonts are embedded. If fonts are not embedded in the PDF, the printer may not read your document right. So make sure you're embedding fonts. And then you go down file export, and there's export as PDF. And then inside of there, you'll have some image compression. I usually do not do any image compression just because that will potentially mess with the DPI of the images. So we don't want to do any of that, but everything else is self-explanatory. Just LibreOffice by default will output a PDF that works perfectly.
Okay. And then switching gears for a moment to the actual, hard copy printer companies. When you are submitting a book to them for printing, what format do you submit that in? And are you able to produce that directly on Linux, or do you have to convert that somehow?
So those are nearly every company I know of preferred as PDF.
Okay. So you would just send them that LibreOffice PDF then?
Yep, this LibreOffice PDF. Also, we haven't talked about book cover images. We can get into there in a moment, but you need a separate PDF, one for the book cover and one for the
pages?
Interior cover design. Yeah. Okay. So you have your interior for your inside pages, and you have your book cover design. Both PDFs. That's what every company wants.
Okay. Now, what about, you wanted to go to the cover images here. I'll give you a two-part question to jump into that area here. As far as designing your cover images, and then additionally how you do your general page layout of your entire book design, what programs or program would you advise our listeners use?
For the interior design first, LibreOffice is the best. User-friendly. The other one that we will hear a lot about is LaTeX, which is more of a markup language that is a little bit more complicated. Now, it can have greater consistency if you're doing a series, and once you have a LaTeX template file set up, it is the easiest to work with overall, but it's not nearly as simple to use. And the outputting, I have not tested all the PDF outputting. I'm guessing it will work. But LaTeX is one, but LibreOffice for sure. Because LibreOffice, if you pull open that side panel that most people don't know what is going on in there, that's actually all your page styles, all your paragraph styles, all your character styles, all your list styles, all your image styles. That is what you do. So you want to go on to wherever your book is being printed on. So I used Ingram and KDP. Nearly everybody has the exact same specs. Although the cover design is slightly off, I've never had a problem using the same cover design for both. But they're going to give you an output. So that's going to be what page margin should you have? How far in should your text be? What does your gutter margin look like versus your outer margin look like? All of this is stuff that LibreOffice does automatically. You just go into your page styles, you tell it, the book needs to be 5.5 by 8.5, put it in there, and boom, it outputs the format. Go in, tell it which margins to go. Boom, outputs the format. So everything is super simple to set up inside of LibreOffice as far as the templating for the page design for interior design. So all that, LibreOffice. That's what you use.
Okay.
Book covers, GIMP is my primary go-to, although Krita is technically maybe better in some respects. When you are doing a book cover, you want to use CMYK. GIMP does not support CMYK out of the box, and so there are the potential issues, but I have never had a problem using an RGB cover design. I've had a couple problems if you have a lot of heavy blacks on a cover. Then the digitalized specs will not look as good, but the final product is perfect. So I've not had any problems. So I use GIMP for everything. I use Krita if I need to do any illustration type stuff, GIMP for the rest of it. And then you do two separate files, one for just the cover, which you're going to use for the ebooks or the audiobooks and your promotional. And then you do need a full wraparound cover, which has the front cover, the side binding, and the back cover. You need that to upload to your files for your wraparound for your book.
Okay. Makes sense. Now, as far as the illustrations go for you did touch on the fact that Krita has the CMYK support and that's better for printing, which I was aware of. GIMP recently did actually introduce a little bit of support for that, but I probably would not trust that myself if I was going to write a book right now. It just, it's so new. Who knows how well it will work, and it's also not even fully supported yet. As far as Krita goes, I'm not very familiar with Krita. I know what it is. When you're designing an illustration in Krita, could you walk our listeners through here a little bit of what the process is, right? Do you use a drawing tablet? How are you doing this with Krita? I'm just assuming you're doing this in your Linux Mint systems. What is the process? Oh, I need to do an illustration on page 25. What is the illustration going to look like?
Okay, so there's a couple parts here. Interior illustrations are different than your cover illustrations. So let's go ahead and cover the interior illustrations first. Assuming you're having a standard black and white document, usually you want a 300 DPI illustration, but 200 will actually usually work for the interior of a book design because they're not high definition prints. Like the book cover is a high definition print. You want 300 DPI. Interior, 200 is generally good enough. So depending on what your illustration is, like if it's a table or something like that, I use GIMP almost exclusively. There is not a problem with that. Where I use Krita is if I need to actually do some animated drawing, and the reason is Krita supports the Wacom tablets better. So if I need to get in there with a pen and paper and draw something, Krita is definitely better. So when I did, for example, the Synaptergy book cover, which is my science fiction novel coming out here in the next month or so, we actually added the exosuit to the kid on the cover using Krita. I did that as a separate layer, merged those together, and then I exported that, and I did the rest of the cover inside of GIMP. Because really, I just use Krita if I need to use a Wacom tablet because the support is better for that. So basically, the startup, create your new document, set your resolution where you need your resolution, and go away at it. So again, if you're using a Wacom tablet, you want to avoid XFCE and Mate. They do not have it as desktop environments. Budgie, GNOME, Cinnamon, all based on the GNOME desktop, will support Wacom tablets better. I think Plasma is starting to support Wacom now. I'm not completely sure on that. In fact, I'm guessing they do because Krita is a K application. So my guess is they do as well. So that's really the only cases that I'm using Krita is when I need to use the tablet for manual drawing things, which is not very common because I'm not a good artist. I'm a much better manipulator. So.
Okay. Same here. I'm horrible at drawing things. I would definitely have to hire out an illustration if I wanted it to be actually reasonably good, I think. As far as when it comes to dealing with these Wacom tablets, I'm assuming from based on what you just said there about the GTK desktops, mainly the GNOME ones, you don't have issues with the Wacom tablet. Is that just a plug and play, or do you have to install some drivers? What's the process for getting the...
It's plug and play. It's already built into GNOME. So if you actually go into just your GNOME system settings, it's right in there. Wacom Tablets is already there. Just plug it in, it's ready to go. You might need to configure the buttons or something, but that's all done inside of the Wacom Tablet Manager.
Okay, so the process is pretty simple. And then as far as connecting that to Krita, I'm assuming that there's a preferences panel you have to go through and connect to it or something like that?
Nope, you have the Wacom Tablet. It's system-wide. It automatically works out of the box.
Okay. So I'm showing my naiveness to this process here. But so when you connect to your tablet, that's it. You don't have to worry about it at all. It automatically will establish to Krita then. You just plug it in, Krita opens up, or you open up Krita, I would assume, and then you would be able to start drawing right there. Correct.
Yeah. And the reason you want to use Krita with the tablet is GIMP does not support the depression of the tablet. So if you're using Krita on drawing, the harder you press on the tablet, the harder the line draws on the computer. So you can that's why it's used for illustrations more, is because it will respond just like a regular pencil or whatever will. You can go really light with a colored pencil, or you can press hard and get a thick colored pencil line. Krita does the very same thing with a Wacom tablet. The harder you press, the harder the lines are.
Okay. Now, as far as requirements for your illustrations go, is there any specific requirements? And if so, have you ever had issues meeting those, like a specific DPI required for illustrations or a specific resolution or anything like that?
Yeah, interior design, you want a 200 DPI resolution. Unless you're doing a color interior design, you want to jump up to 300. But for standard black and white, you want 200 DPI, and on a book cover, you want 300 DPI. So there's no issues. GIMP, Krita will both support those perfectly. Just create your document with the proper DPIs up front. Now, the one problem that you will have is if you're trying to source images elsewhere, you just need to make sure that they are the correct DPI. Taking a 72 DPI image and scaling it up to 200 DPI will not work. It's not going to look good. But that's going to be something, Photoshop won't do that either. So, you're out of luck either way. So
yeah, that's not a Linux issue. That's just not being able to upscale an image issue and make it look good. Yeah.
Yep. That is what that's about.
Okay. Now, as far as any other requirements when it comes to producing your book on Linux, we've talked about EPUB and things like that. We've talked about the fact your audiobook needs to be as MP3s. When it comes to the audiobook stuff, I'm assuming that this is going to be an area where most people are going to have trouble. Because even for myself, like I know about audio and everything, but to me, I think that I would have less trouble even with the typing out than I would with the actual audio, because the audio, from what I've heard, there was a lot of strict requirements on audiobooks. We were talking the other day about this, and you dispelled some of that for me. It doesn't seem to be as bad as I originally thought. So if you could explain to the listeners, what is the general requirements when I'm producing an audiobook or I'm hiring out an audiobook to be produced, however it's being done, what is the general requirements other than, MP3 format that I need to provide to ACX and what was the other one?
ACX, Findaway Voices, and I forget the name of the other ones. There's a couple other companies out there as well that do it. Let me see if I actually have my exact spec guide here. I might have thrown it out because I have everything automatically set running now. But it's basically, it is, you need a floor of negative 60 dB. You need a maximum amplitude of it's either -3 or -3.5 dB. I forget what it is. And then you have an average RMS for the wavelength of about, I think it's somewhere around the -20 range is what you want it to be. So it's actually fairly simple. And like I said, as long as you have the files done reasonably well, there is a plugin that will literally do the rest of it. And so it's not something you really have to worry about. Now, here are the factors, though. And I actually did a whole video on Writing Done Right about this. Should you narrate your own audiobook? If you don't have the voice for it, you don't want to. You want to outsource it. If you do have the voice for it and you have the technical skill to edit it, you can. You just want to make sure you have a good mic. You don't want to use a USB mic, as good as some of those are, like your Yetis, your Snowballs. As good as some of those are, they still do not get you the quality you need. You want to get a good mic with a good soundboard, with a good, something that you're not going to pick up any background static. You want it to be when you're not talking, it should be dead silent. And some of those USB mics will give you that background hum that you'll hear. You do not want any of that. You want dead silence when you're not. So you do need to invest in a good hardware equipment, but once you have the good hardware equipment, getting it running on Linux is not a problem.
Okay. And another thing for you here, so a couple more questions here. We're getting close to the end of the show, but a couple more questions here to start kind of getting towards the end of the show here. One, when it comes to this plugin, is it free? And if so, can you give me a link to put in the show notes for everybody to be able to download it? Two, the other big question is, you talk about having an audio console, a mixing board, and then having, I'm assuming, an XLR style mic. What mic would you advise to use for recording audiobooks, and what mixer would you advise? Or if you have multiple recommendations as well?
Yeah, as far as digging into all that, I actually just use a $20, $25 single channel Pile converter board to convert my microphone to USB audio because I just have a little bit of controls. So as long as you're not using a standard, $60 to $100 out of the box USB mic, as long as you go anything slightly more professional, then that's fine. I'm using a Shure condenser mic. I forget which one it is, but that's good. I also have a wireless mic set that also works really well. Both of those get me really good audio because they're both running through the board. That's all the thing is you just want, it doesn't have to be a big elaborate board. Although if you're doing a lot of audiobooks, you want to invest in something that's better. And my audiobooks sound fine, I use a $20 Pile board. That's all I use. You can do something better though. You probably should. You're probably cringing over this being an audio guy, but
I mean, I gotta say, you're just, you're talking here and I'm just like, I'm not in this, but I do gotta say, maybe go a little higher than $20. I mean, my unprofessional opinion when it comes to producing audiobooks, because I've never made one, but that just, I don't know. I feel like that $20 is a little bit lower than it should be, but hey, if it works and you're able to produce the books. And I mean, I think one thing we got to establish too is, are you making your 100th book or your first book? I mean, obviously if you're making your first book, you're not even sure you might want to do this again. Maybe it's better to get the $20 mixer, right? But when you actually are going out and you produced 100 books, it's like, I really like this. Maybe I'll make, a couple thousand books in my lifetime or whatever you think the number might be. Maybe it's a good idea to invest in either, hiring out, an audio engineer and a nice studio to record in, or at least getting a nice board or something, right? And a nice mic.
Yeah. I mean, all of the above, because really, I would like to have a better board. It's just a matter of priorities. What I have right now does not produce bad quality, and so I'm just going to stick with it in the case because of priorities. So, and I know I'm probably going to be producing audiobooks until I die. So, for me, upgrading it, also running the YouTube channels, getting a better board would be a better thing to do. But hey, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it,
I got you.
As far as that plugin, yes, the plugin is free. You can find it if you just do an internet search for Audacity ACX. You'll find a link to the plugin and an entire guide on how to use it on Audacity's official forums.
Okay, sounds really great. Thank you so much for giving our listeners some great information here. And, it's really nice to have people in the Linux community like yourself, in my personal opinion, shouting from the rooftops. People are like, oh, I can't use Linux for creative work. Yes, you can. I make YouTube videos on Linux. You make YouTube videos on Linux. You make books on Linux. I mean, it clearly can be done. What can you say to the listeners that would dispel that, right? What can you say, look, this is totally doable for those on the fence?
I would say, okay, then it's a multifaceted answer. On the one hand, if you're working for a big company and they say you have to use Photoshop, you don't have a choice. You have to use Photoshop. But if you're an independent creator, I'm sorry, you do not have to use Photoshop. GIMP does everything Photoshop is going to do. You just have to learn how to do it. And if you remember back to the very first time you opened up Photoshop, you opened up Sound Booth, you opened up Illustrator, you opened up whatever program is, you did not just open it up and get out of the box. Especially if you've been working on it for 10 years. Like I've been a freelance web developer for 10 years. I've been using Dreamweaver for 10 years. Obviously, I can go into Dreamweaver and do a really good job. But if I go over to Linux, I'm like, okay, Windows is no longer an option. I made that decision a few years back. I said, I'm going to ride out this Windows computer until it dies. When it dies, we're done with it. We're switching to Linux. We're done. Bluefish Editor does everything Dreamweaver does, except for one little part that's extremely minor, and I don't need it. It just takes the time to get used to the software. So stop saying I have to run Photoshop and ask, what task do you need to accomplish? If you just need to accomplish an image, you can do that with a variety of applications, which could be GIMP. It could be, there's online versions of Photoshop competitors. There's actually an entire channel. I think it's Jay Christina, I forget exactly the channel. He is a full-fledged professional graphic designer, and he just completely dropped all the Adobe products, and he had an entire playlist of what programs he tried and tested and switched to. And some of them were free and open source. Some of them were other proprietary. They just weren't Adobe. And so you always want to ask, what do I need to accomplish and how do I do it with FOSS software? That's the real thing.
I agree with you 100% on that. As someone that switched to Linux several years ago, as you have as well, we both made that jump to Linux. You're still, in that full transition, I guess, professionally from what you're saying here. But as far as for me, I do all my work on Linux these days. And what I will say is, look, there is some situations, like you said, with the employer, if you're working for someone and they say you have to do this in Photoshop, I mean, obviously you got to do it in Photoshop, right? But if you're working for yourself, a lot of times you can do the FOSS open source software option. And the reason I'm going to say a lot of times is because there is edge cases I've ran into where it's like, okay, this open source app does 99.99% of what I need, but I really need that fraction of a percent to get this task done, and I cannot get around it for whatever the reason. There may be that rare case where you still might need to use a Mac or a Windows machine, but the reality is the vast majority of you are not going to hit that edge case. Like, for example, in the video world, if you're producing stuff for television, for example, a lot of broadcast vendors require you to deliver either DNx HD or ProRes video output. Let me tell you, folks, you can produce that on Linux like there's no tomorrow. You can produce it in Kdenlive. You can produce it in Olive. You can produce that in Shotcut. That's 3 editors I just named, and I'm sure there's probably more that can produce ProRes or DNx HD outputs. And I'm aware this isn't video related, the actual topic, but the whole point is, at the end of the day, you can, in many cases, get around these issues. And again, if you can't, I totally understand if somebody has to use Windows for this particular task. But the reality is the vast majority of you, I would be willing to bet, would not be in this situation. And you should really be looking at the alternatives. For example, I like doing video stuff. And, for a long time, I thought Linux was just not there with video. And look, there is some things it can't do, yes, but it's pretty darn good these days. And I think if you're trying to run a YouTube channel or do, simple productions, you can totally do them on Linux. I mean, there are some situations where you might not be able to. I mean, if you're dealing with a production like that requires you use Avid, like we were talking about with Photoshop a minute ago, obviously you got to use Avid. But the reality of it is, the vast majority of you listening to this, I do not think is that case, especially if you're independent, which is one of the reasons I like being independent, is that I actually have the ability to choose what I develop and use, right? I don't have to use Windows unless I want to. And I do have a Windows system here just for testing around stuff. And I got to say, dealing with Windows is such a pain. I would rather work around, at least myself, the few limitations that the Linux world might not be 100% there on yet, than I would to use Windows. That's my 2 cents on this particular issue. Because Windows has become so bloated with Windows 10 and so problematic, as I'm sure you're aware. You did do a video a while back on Windows 10, so I'm sure you know from that alone, if not other experiences. But Windows 10 is
can be
just
painful.
Yeah, exactly. When you was doing production on Windows, you were using Windows 7 or Windows 8 or something like that, I'm assuming, right? You weren't actually going to use Windows 10 for production, was you?
No, Windows 7, because I went out on my own as a freelance web developer a decade ago. And back at that time, I bought a new computer for it. I bought me a little $800 floor display computer, and it still works as good as it did the day I brought it home. So I'm not just going to wipe it or all that. I'm just going to keep that process going. But I actually do have the next computer in line when that one dies. I actually use that for all my backups and for a couple select projects as well. So, I actually have a dual system running right here. So if that just suddenly dies, so what? Let's just roll on to the next one, So that's kind of what we're doing. So.
Makes sense. You're ready to make that full transition to Linux at any time.
Yeah, if this computer died tomorrow, I wouldn't skip a beat.
Yeah.
In fact, I might not even move the carcass of the old computer. I'd probably just lay the new one right on top of it and swap the cables and be done.
There you go. And I will say, as far as 7 goes, to me, it was the last good version of Windows. And as far as I'm concerned, the way Microsoft's going, it's definitely going to be the last good version of Windows for the foreseeable future. Yep. So, I mean, if you're on Windows, folks, and you have to be on it, air gap have a Windows 7 system and air gap it if you can. I mean, don't put it on the internet, because that's not a good idea. But, if you're just like editing, a lot of people that are in the creative fields, they're doing stuff that's offline anyway. Like editing video, you don't need to be on the internet for that, right? Or editing audio. You can drag your files in from your your red mags or whatever you're using, for your media. There's so many different formats when it comes to audio and video these days to be able to get audio and video onto a computer. But whatever it is, whether it's on an SSD or whatever format you're recording in and whatever device you're recording to, these days you can pretty much bring anything over. So if you have to use Windows, either use Windows 10 and air gap it or use Windows 7 and air gap it. Depending on what you need. I mean, some things these days only support 10, and so you might have to go with 10, but I definitely feel sorry for you if you have to use Windows 10 for anything. There's a fellow that I'm friends with, and the only reason that he is still on Windows is because there's certain games that he does not want to give up, and they're Windows only. And so what I really hope for is in the near future that will be changing. Do you think in the future that things will continue to get easier in Linux in different areas like video production, audio production, games that people can play, that kind of thing? You think things are going to continuously head towards a, better ecosystem?
Mm-hmm.
You do?
Absolutely. It's been moving in a positive direction for a long time. And even in the last 5 years, there's been so many improvements in the Linux world that it's shocking how many improvements we've had. So, and I think that's going to keep getting better. From what I hear from people who do play video games that on Linux, and I'm not a gamer, so I don't know, but those people are telling me that it's just getting better and better every day. So my guess is it's going to get better and better every day, is my thought.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I've seen it with video as well. Because that's my main focus is the video and audio stuff. So for me, I don't play very many video games either, but I have seen specifically the audio and the video worlds, especially the video world, it's gotten a lot better. Audio production on Linux has been good, in my opinion, for a long time. But video has been, in my opinion, and it was one of the big things that really kind of made me have issues making the move, to be completely frank with everybody listening right now. When I first made the switch to Linux, I stayed for a while and then jumped back to Windows. And I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember for sure why I moved back. But if I remember right, it was something related to just having issues with video production on Linux. For me, I don't like dealing with Kdenlive. It has some issues. I understand those developers do a lot of good work, and I appreciate that. I have edited stuff in it in the past, but it's just, for me, it doesn't really work. Right now, I really like the Olive video editor. So that's, to me, one of the big things that's changed is the video editing landscape has gotten way better. To me, Olive really reminds me of a pro level editor like you would find on one of the proprietary operating systems. It's got track layouts in the same way. It honestly looks like old Premiere Pro to me, which is perfect because I like that layout. So I know we're going a little long here, but I do that when we have guests a lot. But all I'm trying to tell everybody here is, at the end of the day, I think me and Tom, I think our whole consensus here is Linux is getting better every day, and you can totally do creative stuff on it. Would you agree with me on that, Tom?
Absolutely. I run my entire businesses from it. From my cloud infrastructure is on my own personal Nextcloud build. So if somebody needs to send me manuscripts or whatever, I just provide them a link. They upload it. All that's run on Linux. I run my books on Linux through GNU Cache. All of the aspects, I do it all. I do it all on Linux. I've been transitioning. I have available access to Macs. I have available access to Windows machines just because of the work and the world that I'm in. I need to for testing. But as far as all practical purposes, Linux is what I use to get stuff done.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I have some Windows systems around here. I do have the ability in the past to pull up Mac VMs and different things like in data centers to test stuff. And then before that even actually had a Mac. So I'm with you there. But again, my whole production workflow, anything that's actually important is going to be done on Linux unless there's just no way, which luckily I haven't really encountered. One last question for you here, and then we're going to end the show here because, like I said, we are getting close to time here, is for the audience out there that are interested in Nextcloud when it comes to the writing, is there any specific things you would advise them to set up special for Nextcloud? And if so, what would those specific advisements be?
Well, there is a learning curve to use Nextcloud for writing. So like if you want to do Nextcloud as a full Google Doc replacement, there actually are a few complications. One of those is that to get code installed, so you need the Calibora Online Developers Edition or code. That is a difficult system to set up, although it's getting easier. They about a year ago, they released a Deb package now. So you need to run that on a separate server because it takes a lot more memory. So I actually have 2 servers that run concurrently to get my Nextcloud running. So your basic Nextcloud will allow you to do anything Dropbox, Google, like Dropbox related type stuff, sharing, syncing files. You can sync your contacts, all that kind of stuff out of the box. But when it comes down to actually using it like a Google Docs replacement, it does take a higher learning curve. You do need to manage a server with an SSH, and you're going to need to install code on it and then connect that to the back end of your Nextcloud. So it's a little bit more complicated, but it is certainly doable. It's not beyond the scope of, of a mere mortal. It's I'm not the best Linux server administrator, and I can pull it off perfectly fine. So you do need to keep that in mind. It is going to be a little bit more difficult, but it is something that can be done if that is a system that you need, if it's important to you. So hopefully that answered that. Nextcloud is a whole topic in and of itself. That's a big behemoth. So
okay. Final follow-up question as far as the Nextcloud stuff goes. Is there a blog post or a video you've done that we could link to in the show notes that would explain to the listeners how they could set up an Nextcloud instance that would work for this type of an environment? Because like you said, this is a whole big topic. We don't really have time in the episode to sit here and talk about it for 30 minutes.
So I have a playlist for Nextcloud. I do not actually talk about how to integrate code into it, but I do have the rest of the Nextcloud setup and how to sync contacts across all the different devices and all those types of things. So I do have a Nextcloud playlist I can get you, yes. It does not have the code information on it at this point in time, but that's something I've wanted to do, but it's just priorities have gotten away from me, so...
Understandable. Life's always busy, and getting everything situated is hard to do. So, Tom, thank you very much for coming on Open Source Tonight. Really appreciate you joining me for the show this week. Billy was off this week. Let me ask you, where can they find you online, Tom, if they want to see you and some of your other work?
So the Switch to Linux is the bigger channel, so YouTube at Switch to Linux. I also have switchtolinux.com. And for the writing specific stuff is writingdoneright.net. And that's like writing like you're writing the book, done right as in correct.net, or YouTube at Writing Done Right. If you go to Switch to Linux, which is the easiest, all my other channels and stuff are linked to that. So that's the easiest way to find it over there because that's the easiest one to find. So that's pretty much where you can find me. Now, if you are more interested in the writing aspect, I do a LibreOffice tutorial a week. So we've done, just looking at the last couple weeks, we've done default style, like default styles, grammar checks, ribbon toolbars in LibreOffice. We've done staving and applying template sheets, typesetting, basically introduction to page settings. And like I said, sometime today, it's probably gonna be late, but sometime today we're gonna do one on getting a proper sections on bibliographies. So a lot of LibreOffice tools. I also have some things on Krita, on GIMP, on Sigil, on Audacity. All these different writing topics are all over on Writing Done Right.
Alrighty. Well, thanks very much for giving the listeners some information. Like I said, we will be putting those links in the show notes as always, opensourcetonight.com. You can find the show notes there. The website's currently being redone, and so it's not really completely there right now, but it should be shortly. However, the links will also be in the RSS feed for the podcast in the description, so you can always check them out there. And you can always find the RSS feed by subscribing at feeds.opensourcetonight.com. Anyway, everyone, this is Vincent for Open Source Tonight with Tom, and you've been listening to the show this week. You can find me online as well throughout the week. You can find me at youtube.com/Vincent Maggard, and you can also find me, of course, on the Open Source Tonight show, which you're listening to right now, obviously. And you can find our YouTube channel where I occasionally make videos related to open source software and Linux as well. On YouTube, Open Source Tonight, the YouTube channel, where the video version of the podcast is available. In addition to that, there is occasional videos related to different open source things, such as Ubuntu 2004, which I recently did a live stream about. You can go check out the recording of that from a few weeks ago. But anyway, you can check me out personally at youtube.com/Vincent Maggard, like I said, and vincentmaggard.com. Until next week, thanks for listening, everyone. Goodbye.